This is the 20 Minutes of Influence podcast with your host, Greg Jameson. Influencer marketing is the process of identifying, researching, engaging, and supporting the people who create high-impact conversations with your customers. On each episode, I talk with industry leaders, business rock stars, and internet celebrities who contribute their knowledge about influencing others and growing your influence. Welcome to the 20 Minutes of Influence podcast. I'm your host, Greg Jameson, and I've got a special treat for you today, especially a special treat if you are an expert or an author, and that is, I've got a guest here. His name is Thomas Umstattd, and Thomas built his first website at the age of 13. Which is actually pretty cool. If anybody's listened to the last couple episodes that I've done on here, you'll know that I started writing computer code when I was 15. So I always appreciate it when people start early and they kind of find their niche and really stick with it. But he actually taught his first web design class when he was 16 years old. So we've got a kindred spirit here with me already, and I'm super excited that Thomas is going to join us today and talk to us about how authors and experts can really market themselves better. So welcome, and go ahead and tell our listeners more about yourself, Thomas.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show. I'm excited to be here. And so I started building websites back when I was a kid. It was for my high school choir, I guess middle school choir. I grew up homeschooled, so a lot of that was combined. It was the same choir for both the middle school students and the high school students in those days. And it was also the Wild West of homeschooling. I realize everyone's homeschooling now. It's the popular thing to do. But back then it was very early days, and a homeschool co-op was getting started in my area. And they were looking for teachers. And so I'm like, well, I can teach a class on web design. So at 16 or 17, whatever you said in my bio, is when I taught a 2-semester-long class on web design to other kids my exact same age. So the very next year they changed the rules. I don't know. At some point they changed the rules where you actually had to graduate high school before you could teach high school at the co-op. But at that first year, they were desperate for anyone who would teach. And it was a really good learning experience for me. And one of my students went on to be a software developer for Intel. So I feel like that my one and only time to teach high school, at least one of my students went on to a good career. But in college, I continued building websites, and eventually I started a company doing websites for authors. And out of that, we launched a podcast, the Novel Marketing Podcast, which is now the longest running book marketing podcast for authors. And every week we teach new marketing tips and techniques and strategies to help sell more books, both online and offline.
Very cool. And I suspect that some of the marketing things that you do to help sell books is probably applicable to other types of digital products as well.
That's right. The biggest difference is that when you're selling your own digital products, typically you have control over the checkout experience, which means you have more data on who's buying, and you have more influence, but also is more responsibility. So you have to take those credit card transactions. Whereas authors, for the most part, sell their books through Amazon, where you have no control over the checkout experience, but you can trust that it's the best checkout experience money can buy, because no one's spending more on their checkout process than Amazon is.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit here about why you think books are so important, especially for experts to have books.
Yeah, a book is a powerful way of encapsulating all of your ideas in one place. So they're not necessarily the best way to reach a lot of people. If you want to reach a lot of people, a blog is better, especially guest blogging for other popular blogs, and podcasting is better. But the challenge with blogs is then it slices up all of your thinking into tiny little bits and kind of scatters them across the web, especially if you're writing guest blog articles, right? You write an article for Fortune, you write an article for Forbes, you write an article for Fast Company, and a little bit of your thinking is scattered on all these different websites. And 5 years later, it can be hard to find that. Whereas if you write a book, it can be a manifesto of your thinking all in one place. And it also serves as a very powerful business card if the book is related to your business, right? If you're an intellectual property lawyer and you wrote the book on intellectual property law, and somebody's trying to decide to hire you or the other guy, right? The other guy who didn't write a book is definitely the other guy in this case. You're the name brand, you can command a premium price, but that doesn't mean you should just throw a book together. It needs to be a quality book, because if it is trash, then it ends up hurting you in the long run.
Yeah, I think that couple things that you said there. One, with like blog posts, one of the things that I actually recommend that people do is that if you are going to blog, is that you keep them in some kind of a format where you can turn around and collect all your thoughts and turn your blog posts into a book. You're absolutely right that you need to have a quality book out there. I so many times see people go, "Oh yeah, I need to have a book because it's a great business card," but yeah, if the book is not really something that you've poured your heart and soul into, it's not going to do you the same kind of justice for your expertise as something where you've really said, hey, this is kind of define who I am, like you said with the lawyer.
That's right. There's this thing called a treatise, which is a little bit shorter than a book, but it's longer than an essay. And it is perhaps the ideal length for defining yourself as a thought leader in a space, right? You write a treatise on something, it's 10,000, 15,000 words, and it doesn't have to be a full-length book for it to kind of help establish you as an author. You can write a full-length book, and it definitely helps, but what's more important than the length is that the quality is good and that you set out with a clear objective with your book, and then that you deliver on that objective. So if you're an intellectual property lawyer, and your goal is for somebody to understand the basics of copyright, right? So you're able to make a promise with your book title, right? How to protect your intellectual property with copyright. Not a great title, but I came up with it off the top of my head. You can make it better, but then you have to deliver on that promise, right? Somebody needs to know and understand copyright law by the time they finish the book. They need to understand how they can protect their book with copyright law, and they need to understand the mistakes to avoid, right? Those are your goals, and then you have to deliver on those goals. And you have to be okay with people reading the book and not needing to hire you because the book was so helpful. The book can't just be one big long commercial for why you're the best intellectual property attorney, and it's just one story of you winning a lawsuit after another. That's not what will work in the publishing world, because people don't want to read stories of how amazing you are. You can have some of that, but you need to have some actual value in the book.
Yeah, stories are obviously great as a way to help people remember things, but you're right. I've read some of these books, even what you call a treatise or whatever, that are 10, 15,000 words, and they are in fact nothing but a commercial for somebody. And that doesn't help you at all, actually. If anything, that kind of hurts you, I think, because that's not the reason why people read books. They read books to be informed and to be entertained, not to be sold on something. On the other hand, having a book where kind of the logical assumption at the end of this thing is that, hey, this person really knows what they're talking about, and I really need help. Did he include his contact information at the end because I want to get in touch with him? That's huge.
That's right, because not everyone will spend the time to read the book, right? They'll be like, I just want to pay you to do it for me. I don't want to learn how to do it myself, right? Because you could learn how to do anything yourself, right? You can get a book on how to grow wheat and get a field and grow your own grain and grind it and make your own bread. Or you could go down to the grocery store for 99 cents. You could buy a loaf of bread that somebody else made, and somebody else grew the wheat. And all of life is that way. But if you are going to write a book on something, it's got to be helpful.
Well, and it's not just a book. I know that people will take digital courses, and at the end of the course, they are like, they've learned what they need to know, where they could do it themselves, but they still might be at the point where they're like, you know what, I know what I need to do, and I'm now can ask the appropriate questions as a professional. And I'm going to go hire somebody to do this because I've now got the knowledge that I need to hire the right person too. So I agree.
That's right. I majored in business in college, and every business major had to take financial accounting and managerial accounting, even if you weren't an accounting student. So the rest of us left the accounting, wing of the business school after those two classes, and the poor accounting students stayed in that wing for the rest of their time there. But it was important that we all learned accounting because we needed to be able to have intelligent conversations with our accountants, right? If you're in a management focus, right, business degree, but a management degree, you need to be able to talk financial accounting. You need to be able to talk managerial accounting. Same with marketing, the same with everything, which is why, at least in my business school, we all took the introductory classes across the board. And even if you're not going to do it yourself, you need to understand it enough so that you can have an intelligent conversation with people who are doing it. One, so you don't get bamboozled, but two, so you make the right decisions, right? You need to understand the difference between
Exactly.
a debit and a credit. You need to understand what cash flow is. You need to understand these fundamentals. And understanding the fundamentals is different than putting together a balance sheet, putting together a statement of cash flows. That's a lot more knowledge that's required than being able to read one that somebody else has made.
Yeah. So it's my belief that anybody that is in business is in fact an expert at something. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in business. Uh, you could be selling widgets or you could be selling services. It doesn't really matter. But whatever business you're in, you probably know, hopefully you know more than the people that are your customers. And you should be able to write a book of some kind then because of the fact that you are an expert, uh, at least more of an expert than your customers are. So if that's the case, how do you suggest that people go about and start writing a book? I think a lot of people might be totally intimidated by that.
So for nonfiction, I actually don't think that people should start writing a book. I actually don't think people should start writing a book for fiction either. What we teach in novel marketing is the be faithful in little things before being faithful in big things approach. So for fiction, we teach writing short stories first. You'll get much better at writing faster. You're able to discover your voice, and those short stories become incredibly useful for marketing down the road. So that time writing short stories is not wasted. For nonfiction, what we recommend is starting a blog. And you don't take every blog post and put it in your book. What you're doing is you're using your blog as a way of finding out which parts of your topic, which questions that you're answering most resonate with your target reader. You may be incredibly surprised by the aspects of your book that really resonate with readers. So for instance, I was working on a book and I was blogging it ahead of time. And I was trying to decide whether or not to put a history of the topic. I had written this history of the topic, kind of background information. Didn't have a lot to do with the case I was making, but it had a little bit to do with the case I was making. And I didn't know if people were interested in the history or not. And so I posted it as a blog post, and it turned out to be incredibly popular. And it also, interestingly, also ended up being the most influential chapter of the book when it came to changing people's minds, because I was writing a persuasive book. And so the blog allowed me to put that chapter in the book with confidence, and it ended up being chapter 2. So I had the opening chapter, and then I went straight into the history, whereas I was thinking about putting it in the appendix or maybe cutting it all together. And this is the power of blogging, is that you can get Google Analytics, you put it on your blog, and you can see not just how many people are reading that blog post, but also how much time they're spending. And if you have a lot of people spending a lot of time on a blog post, that's a winner. That's when you should put a little check by and make sure it ends up in the book.
Great advice. And actually, as you were saying that about fiction writers, I was thinking about someone like Louis L'Amour that wrote tons and tons and tons of short stories that ended up being super popular because of the fact that that he got really good at it. And you can compile a bunch of short stories into a book later as well. So yeah, I think that's great advice, and I'm a huge proponent of blogging as well. But as you've done this and you've said, okay, so certain things have become obvious as to what is what people are interested in. What are the things that you have found specifically for authors and experts that people are the most interested in?
It depends. Classic consulting answer. But the part of what you're doing with your blog is not just finding the topics that resonate with your people, you're also finding your people. Because what may be interesting to one group of people is not interesting to another group of people. And the more you narrow your focus, especially now with the internet, you really want to narrow your focus. And a good example of kind of how this works, I remember talking with a webmaster who lived in Iceland. So Iceland is a very constrained nation. It's a single language in this island, and the island is, I want to say 500,000 people, somewhere between 500,000 people and 2 million people in the entire language group, right? And once you leave Iceland, nobody speaks Icelandic, right? It's not a language of international trade. And there were, back when this guy was in Iceland, something like 4 web design companies on the island of Iceland, right? The nation of Iceland had 4 web design companies, which meant if you were building websites in Iceland, you had to be able to build websites for any kind of company, right? Because you have to be broad. That was a strategy that worked in such a small kind of market. And it was a constrained market because of that language and because of the geography. If you are an English speaker and you're selling products to English speakers, you have the exact opposite challenge. There are maybe 100,000 web design companies building websites for English speaking businesses, right? And so the businesses that work, the web design companies that work, are the ones that have a very narrow focus, right? We build just author websites. We build websites just for people in this town. Sometimes we only build websites for people in this town that also are janitors or whatever, right? You have this really narrow focus, and that is where the power is. That's where the money is in a large market. And the internet is basically an infinitely large market. And all of the internet is more or less in English. In fact, in the olden days, it all was in English. It's starting to become a little more internationalized. It used to be, even if you're in another language, you had to type the address in with English characters. Right? The code behind the internet is still English-based code, which means that you're able to sell even into other countries. When we do, our podcast is downloaded all over the world, our website's visited all over the world. And I imagine many of you are experiencing the same thing. And so you need to find your group. You got to find your tribe, your small niche of people, and you need to find out how they're weird and how your weirdness makes them happy, right? It's not about being everything to everyone. And I see that as one of the biggest mistakes people make, especially if they're going from the physical world, where you were a store and you sold, your general goods store, and you sold to anyone in town, right? That's a strategy that works in the physically constrained world, but that doesn't work online. If you're trying to sell generic things to everyone, you're now competing with Amazon, and you can't compete with Amazon without millions or even billions of dollars of backing. Whereas if you are just selling to some super narrow niche, suddenly you can compete and you can make really good money.
Okay, so I agree with all that, but it seems like one of the things that you were saying, that you use your blog to find out what it is that people are interested in and excited about. And as you've been doing, writing blogs and doing podcasts, seems like one of the topics that you and I talked a little bit here about offline was people are interested in knowing how to use email for their marketing, as an example. Uh, are there other examples of things that are really specific to authors and experts that have kind of hit hot buttons with your business over the years?
Yeah, well, let me kind of talk about the story behind how I got to that episode. So our most recent episode is about tools to help grow your email list. And we sent out a survey a while back of our listeners, and the topic that they were the most interested in was email. So we just asked the people who listen, the people who subscribe to your email list, what topics are you interested in? But in addition to that, I interact with our listeners and blog readers on Slack and on Facebook. I have consulting groups with some of them where I get to know them really well, and they kind of stand in as representatives for the rest of the audience. There's over 100 patrons of the podcast, and they send in questions every month for a patrons only episode that we put out. And so I have a lot of back and forth communication with the audience. And this is really important. It's really important to know who your audience is, to be asking them what their questions are, answering their questions, and interacting. And my episodes now come out of often direct questions that come in for that patrons only episode. Somebody will ask a question and I'm like, the answer to this question is too big for a quick answer here. It deserves its own episode. And they love it when that happens, right? They get, 30-minute episode just answering their one question. But that's useful for me, because if one person in my audience had that question, many people in my audience have that question. And the more of them I interact with, the more I start to see the same themes coming out in terms of what their questions are. And that's what allows me to create the kind of content that they love so much, they want to spread it to their friends. They want to post it to their Facebook groups. And that's, it creates the ripples that grow and grow and grow. And so, yes, how to get more email subscribers is a topic that they are very interested in. And we hit it frequently on the Novel Marketing Podcast. And those are often some of our most popular episodes by the download count.
Awesome. So let's take a quick break. And on the other side of the break, I want to actually dig into not only email marketing, but maybe what you think are the top marketing tips that authors and experts should really kind of pay attention to if they're getting into this space. So we'll be right back after this. Hi, I'm Greg Jameson, the host of the 20 Minutes of Influence podcast. Every week, I not only have the opportunity, but the real privilege of interviewing experts in their field, true thought leaders, and I get to share this information with you. The purpose of this is really to help you sell more of your products and services online, which is the core premise of my primary business, Web Stores Limited. At Web Stores, we go out and we create e-commerce websites for small businesses. Plus, we do internet marketing and digital advertising for those businesses to really help them sell more online. We have a whole number of resources and tools designed to help make this process easier for businesses, probably much like yours. I've been the author of several #1 best-selling books, including Amazon's Dirty Little Secrets and The Influencer Effect, plus a whole series of online courses if you want to learn how to do this stuff yourself. The best way to remain in contact with me, besides subscribing to this podcast, of course, is to simply go to gregjameson.com/free gift, where I have a special offer for you simply because you are a valued listener to this podcast. Thanks again, and now let's get back to today's episode. Welcome back to the 20 Minutes of Influence podcast. My guest today is Thomas Umstattd. And right before the break, we were talking about what are the best marketing tips that authors and experts need to know. And specifically, one of the things that obviously comes up frequently in Thomas's world is email and how to grow your email list. So I'm going to let Thomas kind of take it away here and share with us some of his advice on how authors and experts need to be promoting themselves.
So the #1 thing is that you need to kind of understand how email works and why someone would want to be subscribed to your email list. And you have to believe this one really sad fact, and that is that no one cares about you. So they don't want to get an email if it's all about you. They want to get an email that's all about them. The emails themselves need to be helpful, and they need to get rewarded as quickly as possible for signing up for your email list. So one way to do this is to create what's called a lead magnet or a reader magnet. And I know there was an episode on this earlier on in the 20 Minutes podcast, 20 Minutes of Influence podcast. You can go back. It's, I think, 5 or 6 episodes back. It's on lead magnets. That's a solid strategy for incentivizing people to sign up for your email newsletter. But that's only a part of it, right? You have to get people to your website in the first place. They need to find out about the email newsletter even exists, which is where SEO comes in which I know you've also had an episode on, but it's also where just really good content, because the real traffic comes in from sharing. And it's not somebody sharing it on Facebook. It's somebody sharing it with a specific friend. This is how sharing happens in 2020. It's one-to-one sharing. If you can get enough one-to-one sharing going on, your blog will spread and spread. So you have the top of the funnel, which is people discovering you, which comes from excellence in the writing and really learning how to make your posts as helpful as possible and as interesting as possible. And then having an engaging reason for somebody to subscribe. So there's the immediate reward that they get, the tip sheet or the guide, or if you're writing fiction, the short story, and then there's the ongoing benefit. Why in all the whole time you need to be answering the question, why should I subscribe to your email list? And then you also want a very easy way for people to unsubscribe, because as you're successful, you're going to pay for per subscriber, and you don't want people on your list who don't want to hear from you. And I even will purge somebody. If they haven't opened up an email in 3 months, I'll eject them from my email list because I don't want to pay for them. And they hold down the open rates, which affects deliverability. So there's no reason to keep people on your list if they don't want to be on your list. You want your list to be helpful and only for people who want to get it. So I'm not advocating spam here. And I'm not advocating spam because it's rude to send somebody an email without their consent, but it's also ineffective. So even if you're a sociopath and you don't care about the feelings of others or you don't care about morality, it just doesn't work. So listen to that part of my argument. So now you've created an email list, you've created your lead magnet, and you've created, let's say, a landing page where people can very easily sign up. There's some tools that I talked about in the most recent episode of Novel Marketing, episode 244. For those of you listening in the future, specifically for authors that are really cool. So the 3 tools specifically for authors are Book Funnel, Book Sweeps, and Story Origin. And these are mostly for novelists, but they can be useful, especially Book Funnel and Story Origin, in kind of helping create those landing pages and helping deliver ebooks for free to your subscribers. But they're all geared mostly for novelists, in that what you're giving away is a short story, and where people are wanting to consume that short story is on their Kindle or their Nook or their Kobo or their whatever. And solving the how do I get it on my weird device, my iPad, using the Kindle app, right? Those apps make that really easy, which is why I recommend them. So those are the specific apps. But let's say you're not an author. The remaining tools that we talked about work regardless of whether you're an author or not. So those tools are wordpress.org, which I'm actually about to do a whole episode on how to build your own website, which, I no longer build websites for authors. I'm so busy with the consulting and with the podcast. The website business I spun off as a standalone company, and it's now run by others. I now coach authors on how to build their own websites, or if they want somebody to do it for them, I'll refer. But it's so much easier now. Back when I was a kid, trying to build websites with front page and uploading HTML files via FTP, it was awful. And then I upgraded to Dreamweaver, and I thought that was so easy. And now with WordPress, gosh, you kids these days have no idea how good you have it.
Exactly.
And WordPress is really important because that's where your landing pages are going to live. That's where people are going to sign up for your website. And I do want to make a distinction here. There's 2 kinds of WordPress. There's WordPress.com, which is for blogging, and it's not what I recommend. If you're a business owner, if you're an author, that's not the right kind of WordPress. What you want is WordPress.org, which is WordPress hosted on your own host. So Bluehost or SiteGround or WP Engine, some hosts like that will host your own custom WordPress instance. And that's what allows you to have premium themes like the Divi theme and also premium plugins. So a few other tools for helping grow your email list. King Sumo is one that I really like. There's actually a free version of this. There's also a web app version that you pay by the month, and you can also get a WordPress plugin version, which is what I use, which is a one-time payment. And it allows you to do viral giveaways where somebody can enter to win a prize, but they get more entries if they bring their friends in. And if you have the right prize, this can be a way of adding hundreds or even thousands of new emails to your list in just a matter of days. It's an incredibly quick way to grow your email list. Another tool that I recommend is Bloom. It comes with a Divi theme. And in my episode, I have competitors, and I have a lot more information. This is like the Cliff Notes version of how to get more email subscribers. But Bloom comes with a Divi theme, and it's a pop-up. and it's a non-evil pop-up. So immediate pop-ups irritate your visitors and they don't work because people don't know you yet. They don't know if they want to get your emails. They haven't had a chance to read your blog. But if people are enjoying what they're reading, a non-intrusive pop-up or a delayed pop-up has a dramatic impact. And I will say, when I first did this, I was so suspicious. But I'd seen enough people doing it and enough people talking it up. I was like, okay, I'll give it a chance. But if people complain, I'm not going to do this. And I did an experiment, and my email subscriber rate went up by 1,000%, 10x increase in subscribers, because we already had a popular blog. It had tens of thousands of people coming to it. We weren't getting very many signups. We added a good pop-up with a good lead magnet, good call to action, and we got basically no complaints and a 10x increase in our signups, and which is why I recommend Bloom. Now, Sumo.com is another one of the competitors. It's pretty good. And then a couple of other tools. One is a Quiz and Survey Master. It's a way of doing quizzes. If you're doing nonfiction, this is really good. You can create a quiz that leads into your topic, right? Going back to our intellectual property lawyer example, it's like how protected are you on copyright, right? And they answer all these questions, and then they get a result at the end, and they can share that result with their friends. The copyright one, maybe not that interesting to share with your friends, but depending on your topic, it can be incredibly viral, and how you promote it can be in a very effective way of building your email list. And I interviewed an author who grew her email list from 2,000 subscribers to 25,000 subscribers using a quiz in just 1 year. And that's not uncommon. I've heard of authors who've gotten into the 6 digits of email subscribers with a popular quiz. And if your quiz goes viral, this is not unheard of. And again, I have a bunch of competitors in the post. And then the final tool that I recommend is Crowdcast, which is a webinar platform. And when the pandemic started, I did a series of free webinars, and I promoted them to my email list. And I ended up it was the best thing I've done all year to grow my email subscriber base. More than the pop-up, more than the lead magnet. People have loved these webinars. They brought their friends to these webinars. And these are just the talks that I normally give at conferences. Not really pitching anything, especially in the early ones, just being helpful. And people really liked them. They signed up, and they would send the replay links to their friends. So we would continue getting signups for weeks and weeks later because the replays were really popular. And Crowdcast is just an excellent platform. I prefer it to GoToWebinar, Webinar Jam, and Zoom, which are the big competitors. Crowdcast is it's a better interface, and it's much better for building an email list. And the attendees really like it because they can vote on each other's questions. So my biggest one I did was 500 registered folks for one webinar. The chat was going too fast to really follow, and there was more questions that we had time to answer. But since people were able to vote on each other's questions, we had some really popular questions. I think a number one question at something like 70 votes, which is, guess what? Really good intelligence on things I should be talking about in future podcast episodes, right? If a question has 70 votes in a webinar, when there's 500 folks registered, maybe 250 or 300 people live at the time, that's an important topic. Maybe I need to devote an episode to that. Maybe I need to blog on that more often. So all of these things go both ways, where you're learning about your audience, you're learning how to serve them better. And this is not some new thing that I created. You can find the beginnings of this idea all the way back in the Bible, right? Jesus said, if you want to have followers, if you want to be a leader, you need to be a servant. And the better that you serve your customers, the better that you serve your email subscribers, your blog readers, the more of them you will have.
Yeah, you touched on a whole bunch of things there, and I knew that we were going to be kindred spirits here because everything that you said exactly the technologies and the procedures that I would recommend too. So that was awesome. And one of the things that I just kind of want to reiterate that Thomas talked about there is that your email list really needs to be engaged with you. If it's not, it doesn't do any good. Your email list, I like to tell people, it's not a vanity metric as to how many people are on your email list. You are better off with a couple hundred people on your email list that are actively engaged with you. They're opening up their emails and really want to get your emails than you are having a few thousand people on your email list if they are not opening up your emails and they really don't care what you have to say. it's going to hurt you more than it's going to help you. So it's not just a question of spamming people that don't want to be on your list. It's a question of it's going to hurt your open rates. It's going to hurt your deliverability rates. And you only want to have people on your list that want to be on your list. So I think that was super good advice. And then I loved all of the things that you just mentioned there as ways to grow your list as well. I'm going to actually, in the show notes, I'm going to make sure that I mention each of those 4 things that you talked about there, because I think those were super important. As we wrap up here, is there any kind of final thoughts or words of wisdom that you want to leave with our listeners?
Find your customer, even if it's just one person, a real version of the customer, not an imaginary friend, and then get to know them in real life or online and serve them, bless them. Find out what their questions are and answer those questions, and do it in the medium in which they want to hear from you. Some people may want to read a blog post. Some people may want to read an email or follow you on Twitter or Facebook or whatever. Everyone's always like, oh, what social media should I do? It's like, ask your customers, right? If you're targeting teenage girls, you're going to be using different communication tools than if you're targeting 50-year-old men, right? They use different technologies, and what technologies you use will really depend on who your customers are. And if you do that, if you can thrill the few that you've gotten to know in real life, they will tell others, and that will grow to the many. And that, I think, is a principle that applies across internet technology platforms. And it will apply to the next ones too, because we're focusing on the human on the other side of the technology rather than on the technological tool as well. And if you're wanting more help with doing that, that's exactly what we talk about on the Novel Marketing podcast. We talk about the technical bits, but we also talk about the human bits.
Awesome. Love it. So I'll put links out to your podcast there as well. And is there any place else that you want to drive people to, or let people know how they can stay in touch with you?
And it's all there at authormedia.com. That's where we have the blog. It's where we have the Novel Marketing podcast. It all lives happily at authormedia.com. And that's also where we have all of our other resources for authors.
Perfect. I'll get that in the show notes as well. And I just want to really say thanks, Thomas, for being here today. This was great advice, and I'm sure that all of our listeners are going to really appreciate what you shared with us today.
Thanks, Greg. It's great to be here.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of 20 Minutes of Influence. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you are interested in booking myself as a speaker at one of your events, or are interested in any of my coaching programs, please visit gregjameson.com.